Let's move on, because the Yorkshire Wolds and the Cheshire Sandstone Ridge are being considered possibly by the government to be areas of outstanding natural beauty, as well as looking at extensions to the Surrey Hills and the Chilterns under government plans. It means that new funding would also be launched to improve and support farmers in those protected landscapes. Delighted to say we're joined from Westminster by the Environment Secretary George Eustice. Good morning, Mr Eustice. Just explain what this government plan is and why it's necessary, I suppose.
Well, I think there's two things. We've set a target to increase the areas of protection that we have in this country to 30% of terrestrial land by 2030, and extending, therefore, some of these areas of outstanding natural beauty will contribute to that. But also, a couple of years ago, we had a review into our protected landscapes, that's national parks and those areas of outstanding natural beauty, and there's a view that we could strengthen more that we do for nature in those areas. So we're looking at how we can bring that to bear through the future agriculture policy, but also how we can try and improve public access. And so today we've announced an additional fund to try to help landowners work with those national parks to improve public access. And I think it's important because, you know, in the last year during this pandemic, sometimes access to the outdoors is all that people have had, and I think people have discovered a sort of new connection with nature, and we want to be able to support that.
We've been talking this morning. Not eating meat is one of the biggest ways to reduce your impact on the environment. How often do you eat red meat a week?
I am a meat eater, so I eat meat several times a week at least. And I think one of the things that I'll be doing later today at a speech that I'm doing at a conference and an event, looking at how we change our approach to agriculture, is considering how, for instance, pasture-based livestock systems can actually significantly reduce the environmental impact of our livestock sectors. People are starting to understand now that the soil is part of that cycle of life, and actually if you've got pasture-based systems and permanent pasture, that can actually lock up a lot of carbon in the soil. So it's not as straightforward as saying don't eat meat.
But would you be persuaded to eat less meat?
Well, the Climate Change Committee have said that people should probably eat a bit less red meat, but eat better quality meat. And what they mean by that is this potential to move away from these very intensive livestock systems, so-called feedlot systems that you see in countries like Australia and the United States, and instead to move to a more natural system where you've got grazing systems, pasture-based systems that reduce the environmental impact and actually can help to lock up carbon.
Mr Eustice, why we got you this morning, because we know this is a big day when it comes to travel and potentially the opening up of the green list again. We're going to get an announcement later on today, aren't we? But it does seem the government's slightly all over the place on this. I mean, you were saying just a couple of weeks ago people shouldn't be going abroad, and now the government looks like they're going to be increasing that green list. What is going on? What is the advice? Should we be travelling this summer?
Well, look, we're taking a cautious approach on this. We just want to make sure that we get more people with that second jab before we go to the final easing of restrictions. And when it comes to travel, you know, it does remain the greatest threat in a way, the greatest threat that a new variant might be out there in another country that's undetected and then therefore comes back into this country. And if we had a variant that could get around the vaccine, that becomes more of a problem. But look, we do recognise that people want to travel again. We do want to be able to support that. Grant Shapps will be saying a bit more later about whether there's going to be additional countries onto that green list. I mean, broadly speaking, the situation hasn't changed a great deal in the last few weeks, so I think, you know, people shouldn't expect huge changes to that, but he'll be saying more on that later. And of course, the government's also said that we are considering this separate issue, which is once people have had 2 jabs, you know, you might be able to take a different approach to quarantine when they return. We need to look at the clinical advice on that. We haven't made a decision yet, but it is something we're exploring.
But isn't the problem, actually, when we look at some of the reaction across Europe, is they're starting to say that we have to go into quarantine or not allowed to go at all. So in theory, even if we expand some of these green list countries, it might still mean that people's holidays can't really go ahead because restrictions are being imposed across Europe.
Well, this is the difficulty, and countries around the world are wrestling with this problem, and obviously we can't control what type of measures other countries might put in place. I think the reality is we're in for some. We've had some terrible disruption, obviously, to travel plans so far this year. It's a difficult year to travel given the nature of the pandemic.
So sorry, Mr. Eustice, wasn't so your answer a couple of weeks ago, wasn't that right? Just holiday at home. Don't bother going abroad this summer.
Well, I was asked specifically what I am doing, and I will be staying in the UK and holidaying at home. I think given the uncertainty at the moment, many other people will have reached that conclusion. I don't want to tell people what they should do, but at the moment we've got a very limited number of countries that are on that green list. It's unlikely that there'll be huge additions to that. But look, I appreciate different people have different approaches. Some will want to travel abroad, and we want to be able to support that as soon as it's safe to do so. OK, George Eustice, the Environment Secretary, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Thank you.